Good evening. The November 20th, 2024 regular meeting of the Planning Commission will come to order at 6:32 p.m. Please rise and follow Commissioner Saikali in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Raise the flag, put your hand over your heart, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I have our Planning Commission Secretary, Ria, please call roll.
Commissioner Lujan, excused. Commissioner Sakali,
Here.
Commissioner Morales, excused. Vice Chair Guerra,
Here.
and Chair Uba.
Present. This is the time set aside for oral communications from the Planning Commission. Does any commissioner wish to make an announcement, report on a conference, a meeting, or request items for a future agenda?
No, I know.
None?
No.
Okay, and I have none. Okay, we'll move forward with our presentation. There is a study session, a draft objective design standards and zoning text amendments to implement the City of Downey Housing Element 2021 through 2029. Will our Community Development Director introduce the staff making the presentation?
Yes, thank you, Chair Uva. As mentioned, item number 5 is a study session presentation, which has been quite staff intensive in preparation, has included city staff and consultants. Our consultant team is comprised of our project manager and team behind him, Jose, and then also I would like to recognize our in-staff planners that are present today, our principal planner, Alfonso Hernandez, Abraham Luna, Jerry Clemente, and Marissa Montero. It's a team effort to prepare the item that will be presented to you tonight. And as you will hear in Jose's presentation, we'll be provided a timeline of future components of today's study session that will be before your consideration in the near future. So with that, I'll turn it over to the presentation. Thank you.
Well, good evening, Chair Uva and members of the Planning Commission, and thank you, Irma. My name is Jose Rodriguez, and I'm a Senior Project Manager with MIG, and I'll be making this presentation along with my colleague Laura Stetson, who will tag team with me for this presentation. So we're excited to assist the city in developing a set of zoning revisions and objective design standards. And I apologize, I'm going to move backwards. Oh, I'm going to go through this entire presentation in reverse, so bear with me. And really, these documents that we're going to prepare to you in a study session format is for the implementation of the housing element. So if you recall, a few years ago, the housing element was adopted, certified, recognized by the state. We're now in a process of implementing that housing element. So for the agenda tonight, we're going to talk about a little bit of background of what that process is. A lot of the state requirements. There are a lot of state requirements saying the city has to do this, the city has to do that. This is part of that process. So we're going to look at zoning revisions, objective design standards. These are both two programs that were in the housing element as what the city said they were going to do. We're going to go through the process of the objective design standards and then talk about next steps. We'll actually be meeting with you fairly soon to go ahead and adopt these, and Laura Stetson will talk about the timeline on why this is being done at this time. So a little bit of
Can I ask
background
a
and
quick
context.
question on there?
Yeah, absolutely, Margaret.
Will we be getting a
Excuse me,
copy of
Commissioner.
this PowerPoint? Because that way I'll do less notes. Will we get this afterwards?
We could provide the planning
Okay,
commission.
good,
Commissioner,
because
yes.
that'll dictate my amount of note-taking. Thank you, I appreciate that.
All right. So just to provide a little bit of context, if you recall, back in 2022, this commission prepared and recommended to the City Council for adoption the housing element. The housing element was adopted thereafter by the City Council and then certified by the state of California, particularly the Housing and Community Development Department, HCD. And so it was done right on the deadline when those were due. The housing element itself has a series of implementation programs. It says it has to do this and do that. One of the key things is accommodating the regional housing needs assessment. The program specifically calls out the number of housing units that needs to be accounted and accommodated by the zoning and the land use element for the 2021-2029 period. So if you could see, that number was 3,986 units. There is a law that does require cities to make sure that there's what's called the no net loss. So let's say you zone all of the properties and they're done by different income levels. I'll keep this really short. In the event that certain income levels are not met, you still have reserve units in the event that there's some horse trading, per se, of units based on different income levels. If affordable housing wasn't built, but market rate was, you have to have that affordable housing ready at other sites. So that's why we're looking at the 4,442, and those numbers are all addressed in the housing element. There's two action items that were through the zoning code that we're updating and we'll be open to answer any questions, is we're creating two housing overlays with different densities to accommodate those additional units, and we're updating the zoning map. And the zoning map is basically consistent with that map in the housing element that shows the different sites. The zoning map is consistent with that map. And what we're doing is allowing that overlay to take place and allow for that additional development capacity. And so I'll show you in a moment, there'll be maps that show those particular sites, and they're exactly consistent with the housing element. In addition to the zoning code changes, Laura Stetson is going to provide a little bit more detail on the objective design standards. This is going to be a standalone document. It will not be part of the zoning code, but it'll still be adopted by and recommended by both the Planning Commission, adopted by the City Council, that creates higher standards for architectural and site design for both the multifamily and mixed use that's allowed by the housing overlay. And it allows for an easier by right process. So if the new project, multifamily housing, mixed use, meets the zoning, meets the objective design standard, it does allow for a by right approval process. We'll get into that in a moment a little bit more, meaning that it does get to pass the Planning Commission for getting approval. And again, this is all trying to meet state law requirements. So let's go through those specific state laws that mandate not just Downey, but all the cities in California to have to go through this process. So not only is Downey going through all this now, many other cities as well is going through this process. I'm not going to read all this text, but really the first law basically says you have to have all the sites and to meet the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and you have to have the zoning in place by a certain time. That certain time was 3 years and 120 days from when the housing element was originally due. So that means the zoning has to be adopted when we count all the years. October 15, 2021 was the original deadline. It was adopted in 2022. You get 3 years plus 120 days. You run all the numbers, and that date is February 12th, 2025 is when the zoning is due. SB 16 is, remember that number I was showing, it was 33,800, and then there's a buffer, no net loss. That's the no net loss requirement, saying that cities need to have a buffer in the event certain sites are not built with affordable housing and they're built with market rate housing. You have a backup supply. The last one, AB 72, just gives the state a little bit more teeth to go after cities that are not complying with their housing element. They're not updating their implementation program. They're not doing the zoning to accommodate. HCD, the Housing and Community Development, does have a little bit more teeth to go after cities that are not meeting their obligation for the housing. So we wanted to recognize those. And so, as I mentioned, to accommodate those number of units, we are creating the 2 housing overlays. There's Housing Overlay 1 and Housing Overlay 2. Both have different densities. They're within different areas. I'll show you maps on where they are located throughout Downey. But keep in mind, it's consistent to what was identified in the housing element. And as I mentioned, the table and the zoning code itself shows that there is a now by right process if the multifamily meets those density standards, meets all of the zoning requirements that we've outlined, and if it does meet the objective design standards, it does allow for a by right process and to skip some discretionary planning commission review. Here's a location of the housing overlay sites. This is a quick map that shows the various sites. Here in the southwest quadrant along Paramount, you can see the dark sites that are in black outline. That is Housing Overlay 2. Up on Stewart and Gray, the blue sites, those are the housing overlay sites 1. And so you can see they're targeted those sites that the state has approved, recognizing there's no constraints to building housing on those sites. Here we have sites that were identified in downtown, along Florence, again, the northern part of Paramount and Firestone. Apologize, that's the text there is blocking a little bit. We did identify some other sites as well where the overlay can apply on certain commercial centers, not replacing the newer commercials, but where there's some vacant lots or developable sites within those commercial shopping centers, allow some of the housing, as well as the Stonewood Center. If you read the housing element, it specifically says, hey, there's some parking areas that are underutilized that could allow for some housing. It doesn't strictly say that you have to replace the mall. You can build around the mall and allow for some additional housing for that site. Again, that 3,000 number was high, so the city, when they prepared the housing element, was looking at different ways to see where they can meet that housing requirement at various sites. And then here we show it along Telegraph. There's some commercial sites that were identified as well. So identified in the housing element, now through the housing overlay. Before I turn this over to Laura, are there any questions or comments on the zoning revisions that we're making? Any questions or comments?
I have none.
And we will open it up at the end if there are any other questions or any other comments the commission would like to make. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Stetson, who will now talk about the objective design standards.
Thank you, Jose.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, other members of the Planning Commission. Laura Stetson with MIG. That was a lot to digest, I think, all at once, and particularly if you had not been involved in the process to update the housing element of the general plan. So if we are speaking too fast, or if there are things that are just too planner-esque, have me slow down and say, wait, Laura, you're not talking to planners, you're talking to people who don't deal with this every day. The objective design standards are a requirement that's essentially been in place in state law for many, many years. There's something called the Housing Accountability Act that's been in place since the early 1980s, which basically says that if somebody's following the rules, doing what the zoning code says, doing everything that a city's regulations indicate are important for the development of housing, a city cannot capriciously deny that housing development. And this is all to ensure that everybody's getting a fair shake when they're proposing housing in a community, housing applications. Over the last 5 or 6 years, the legislature has doubled down and has put together many, many laws that have said, cities, you haven't been doing your part to allow housing to be built in your community, so we're going to make it a lot easier for developers who are following the rules to have housing proposed and followed through. So that's a lot of Jose laid the groundwork for. So there are 2 parts to this project that we're going to be bringing forward to you in a couple of weeks for hearing and recommendation to the City Council. It's the rezoning, changing the zoning code to establish these housing overlays, indicating on the zoning map where those overlays are going to occur. That'll be in the zoning code. But then this completely separate document that says, look, Downey has a pretty high set of standards for what we want residential development to look like. And so these objective design standards are letting the development community know if they're going to come into Downey, these are the things that you need to do to create the quality living environments that we're looking for, particularly because a lot of these sites that are proposed for housing are not in your typical neighborhoods. They're along corridors. They are adjacent to existing commercial centers. And so it needs an extra level of care to make sure that things are going to fit in to the context that they're proposed. So that's why we've got the objective design standards. And Irma, just to check, was the commission provided the objective design standards late yesterday, or they have not yet been given the objective? Okay, so this is the first chance that you're getting to take a look at this. And I know it's hard to look at it fast and absorb, but you will get the entire document as part of your package with plenty of time to study it. But what we wanted to do this evening is to give you a heads up on what it is you're going to be looking at when it comes through and to walk you through the document. First question, what is an objective design standard? It is something that is quantifiable and measurable. And it's easy to have a standard for something like a building height or a setback or a number of parking spaces. Those are all regulations that are in your zoning code today. The objective design standards go beyond that and start to regulate how a building looks, how it relates to its neighbors. That's a little bit harder to do, but that's what the objective design standards do. And state law is very clear that if somebody is looking at the objective design standards document, somebody who is not part of city staff, they need to understand and come to the same conclusions as to what that says as city staff who wrote the document is implementing the document. So it needs to be very clear and quantifiable. We walked through why these objective design standards are in front of the Planning Commission, and we'll be going on to the City Council. But I think the third bullet point is probably the most important one. It's to create certainty and efficiency in the review process for mixed-use residential multifamily residential and mixed-use development. And let me be clear, this does not apply to single-family homes. This is for multifamily housing and any mixed-use project that has at least a 2/3 component in terms of square footage of residential. So it's for the multifamily housing, be it condos, townhomes, apartments, anything that runs the gamut other than a single-family home. And so clarity, certainty, efficiency, but making sure that quality design is what the end result is. Now, some cities have in their codes today, or as part of a separate document, just like you have design guidelines for your single-family residential, some cities have guidelines for multifamily that say things like, oh, the development should provide visual instance, or you should consider spacing and patterns and proportions. I think if 2 people looked at that language and tried to decide exactly what that means, you might come to two different conclusions if you're looking at a project. So those are subjective standards that cannot be included in an objective design standards document. So if you look at the example to the right-hand side, there are shall statements, and there are statements that apply numeric standards to what an objective design standard is. It doesn't have to be dictatorial. It can give choices, and you'll see when you look at the objective design standards, when you have your full packet, that there are many standards that say do 2 out of the 5 things or 3 out of the 7 things. So you want to make sure that the standards aren't going to be creating sameness in all development, because if you have, everybody shall do exactly this, you're going to get a lot of sameness, but it's giving choices to developers. The document is organized per these chapters. I think the ones that are probably of most interest are those 3 in the middle, the site design. How do you lay out a project on a site to make sure it functions well? How do you address architecture and building design? How do you address landscaping as it's incorporated into this entire site design? And so you'll have fun reading those just to see how you can regulate design through some fairly straightforward standards. In terms of applicability, as I mentioned, this will apply to new multifamily development, residential mixed use, as well as additions to existing multifamily and mixed use projects. Because the zoning code currently sets the height for multifamily buildings at 35 feet, that is something that the objective design standards recognize. And so when we were putting them together, the whole thought was, let's write standards that respond to the maximum height limit today of 35 feet or 3 stories. And so that was really the impetus for how we've put these development standards or these design standards together.
Can I ask a question on there? So
Yes, sir.
we keep seeing this building here, which is the national core of the view, but that's 5 stories. So did we do that because that was allowed because it was affordable housing? Versus now we're going to 35 feet on the overload zone?
Very perceptive question there is that if UARPA provides and asks for a density bonus and provides affordable housing, they are able to ask for waivers from development standards. And so the most common waiver is for building height.
Okay.
In order to get in additional units. Also in the downtown area, I do think that there are,
Specific plan for
the
that.
specific plan has different standards than the rest of the city.
Okay, thank you.
The design standards, as I mentioned, when you think about design, when you're thinking about designing a residential project, the first thing you do is to look at the 2-dimensional part of it. How can I lay out everything on a lot? And then you also start to look at the 3-dimensional. And so the design standards divide it first into, let's look at the site plan, this 2-dimensional. Where do we put parking? Where are the open space areas? How do you accommodate pedestrians? Where do you put bike parking? And where do you put trash pickup areas? If you're having a loading area, where are those put? And so these are all addressed in this site design standards section. The chapter that addresses architecture and building design uses some fairly common architectural terms that talk about the massing of a building. How do you break it up so that it's not just a giant wall that arises from the ground? How can you make a building, and I know this sounds kind of funny, but how can you make it move this way by putting projections in and out along the facade, or even, and not so much with a 3-story building, but how can you set it back? How can you add detailing in terms of bay windows, balconies, things that provide texture and interest to a building? How can you design the doors and the windows so that they're not just aluminum frame windows or plain doors? There are things that you can do to require the doors to be inset, to require windows to have maybe faux panes in them, things that make it interesting and have architectural features that are consistent throughout. If you're going to choose an architectural style, stick with it. Don't do a craftsman roof and a mid-century modern door and some other base along the building. Do something that has a style that is very clear. There are standards that address materials and colors. These are choices, that give the developers some options. It's not dictating that everything be earth tone or everything be pink. It gives you the ability to choose different colors and materials to create interest in the building. And there are specific standards for parking structures. If anybody is going to build a parking structure, it needs to be something that doesn't look like a parking structure. It needs to fit in well. For mixed-use development, there are specific standards that talk about the relationship of any storefronts to the street. So if somebody is going to be doing a mixed-use project that might have ground floor retail, or maybe retail buildings in the front and residential behind, the whole idea is to create something that's interesting to the pedestrians that are walking by. Just, like a lot of that you've seen along Firestone. I hadn't been to Downey for a while, and it's just kind of nice to see some of the nice things that have happened along Firestone and in the downtown area. The city does have landscaping standards. The objective design standards reference those to make sure that a developer knows that he or she needs to incorporate drought-tolerant landscaping, good parking lot landscaping, things that retain water rather than have it run off into the gutters and go down where it might be wasted, but instead try to capture it and get it back into the groundwater basins, and then also addresses synthetic turf consistent with state law. There are other things that sometimes people just think are afterthoughts when you're designing a project, but the objective design standards say, no, if you're starting to plan this site, think about where the mailboxes are going to be. Put the trash receptacles in an area that's convenient for everybody and isn't a nuisance for any adjacent neighbors as well. So think of everything holistically, and the objective design standards address walls, fences, trash receptacles, how you deal with outdoor lighting, and one of my favorites is utilities. I don't know if you've ever gone to visit somebody in an apartment building or condominium, and just right out there in front is this giant utility box that is a distraction both for pedestrians as well as visually. And so the whole thought is do something so that the utility equipment is integrated, hidden some ways, doesn't detract it anyway from the look and the function of the building. The objective design standards are set up to make it easy for a developer or applicant to you can read all the objective design standards, but at the back is a handy checklist that you can go down. This is going to be useful for staff as well. Say, has this development application met all of these objective design standards? And so that's something that will be a handy tool for everybody. Before I move to next steps, are there any questions about what we're presenting this evening?
I have a question. For the mixed use, do you usually have the parking lot in the back?
I think not just for mixed use, but for multifamily, the whole push is to hide parking from public view. So it would be in the back or off to the side, or if some of it's visible, that there needs to be a hedge or something that's going to hide I don't want to say ugliness, but I'm going to say ugliness of a parking lot, something that just makes it look a little bit better.
Can I ask a quick question? So I'm glad that you're doing this. I'm a big design guy. Things can look totally different in a community by design. And I like the design standards. And something that popped up when we were talking about utilities, and I don't know, I understand that sometimes in these multifamilies or commercial new projects, you have to put all the water piping in the front on the grass so the fire department can see it and so forth. But I think it leaves it an option whether it can be painted or not. And I know that sounds insignificant, but some of the developers go really cheap and just put up the thing and the piping is terrible, ugly, versus just painting it blue, green, or whatever, which will still meet the code for the fire department that they need to be able to be outside. Is that something as simple as that we can write into that designs?
Absolutely, and I don't recall off the top of my head if we've done that. I'll tell you, Commissioner Guerra, my great wish is that those types of utilitarian things can be turned into almost a public work of art type thing. Yes, it still serves as that really critically important function to plug in the fire hose and put out the fires, but can you make it look a little bit more fun?
Yeah. I think a little paint goes a long ways too. And
We'll start with
the
paint.
fire department wouldn't have any issue with that. Thank you.
Next steps. Jose laid out the timeline for you, and it's critically important that the city adopt these zoning changes by the February 12th deadline to conform with state law and avoid any challenges to the city's zoning regulations. And so to meet that schedule, we will be coming back to you just after Thanksgiving on December 4th for the public hearing, and then move to city council hearings in mid-January. Because this is an ordinance, it does require a second reading of the zone changes. The objective design standards will be adopted by resolution, but it's being carried along forward with the zoning revisions. And so by having it in place or having the second reading in January, it does become effective 30 days after that. But in talking to HCD and just based on other projects we've worked on, the city is showing absolutely a concerted effort to meet that deadline. And so that's why we wanted to come here this evening, so that you have a heads up as to what you're going to be getting on the 4th of December.
Are those the wrong dates for the city council? Is that 2025?
That should be 2025. Thank you. We're not in that mindset yet. Let's see. Jose, are you covering this part, or is?
I can cover it, or it's up to you.
I'll start, and then if you want to jump in on this. So there are a number of changes to the zoning code that are being proposed, in addition to the 2 new overlays that Jose mentioned. The first is to increase density in the R3 zone per the housing element. The new policy is to allow up to 30 units per acre in the R3 zone. So this is on properties that are not as part of the overlay, so just the R3 zone generally will be increased to 30. A couple of tweaks to the mixed-use zone to be in parallel with that. So, and these are zoning revisions that are really going to be coming later. We'll also be updating the zoning map. We will be revising residential standards to meet a bunch of programs that are in the housing element. We'll also have to update the emergency shelter standards and the parking standards for multifamily housing. And Irma, I think we probably have a workshop or study session with the Planning Commission at a future date, probably in the spring of next year, early spring next year, to cover this part 2 of the zoning code update. But what we're proposing to come before you on December 4th needs to be done to meet the letter of the law with regard to accommodating the regional housing needs assessment, the RHNA. So you'll be having a series of zoning code amendments that you'll be reviewing over the next 6 to 7 months or so. Jose, why don't I turn it over to you for the general plan work?
Thanks, Laura. In addition, so just to clarify, there's a part, we're calling it part 1. It's accommodating the deadline and the regional housing needs assessment. Laura just went through part 2. We'll be updating other parts of the zoning code. In addition to that, and if you recall, there was a presentation earlier about the environmental justice element, you may have recall. But since then, city staff has decided to update the entire general plan. There's an entire environmental impact report that's being prepared, and for cost efficiencies, and it just makes sense to go ahead and update the entire general plan. We'll be probably coming back, I should say probably, about a year from now, we are going to update the entire general plan and bring it forth for adoption. So that's coming up, I'd say, anywhere from within the next 12 months, the entire general plan. It's a huge document, but not only are we updating the general plan, there's the engagement that's involved, preparing the environmental impact report. In addition to that, we're also updating several specific plans, and we'll be working with staff to decide whether some of those need to be rescinded. Some of them were developed or prepared back in a long time ago, and some of them just require just update to the specific plan itself. And again, these are the environmental justice element. The specific plan is also related to the housing element update as well. And lastly, there is a whole section on updating historic or at least identifying, there's technical analysis being done for historic resources that's being being done in concert with the general plan. Some of that will help the design element that has a historic resources component, and some of it's just going to help identify making sure that historic resources in the cities are reviewed through a historic context statement, a limited survey, and then also, it's kind of hard to read with the text there, but style guides. We're talking about objective design standards. There will also be, not we, but there's a consulting firm that's assisting us that'll prepare style guides for historic properties as well. Yeah, let me look at this presentation. I think we're about done here. So with that, we're happy to answer any other additional questions or comments, both on what we presented and any upcoming work. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I would just like to thank you and your firm for all your hard work, and our city staff, because I think this has been a lot of hard work on your guys' behalf. You're doing an amazing job. I remember, Jose, you and I met,
Yes.
I don't know, a couple months, 3 months ago to go
Correct.
over some input and some suggestions, and it was a lot at that time, and now I can see it all coming into place. So that's wonderful.
Yep, and I met with Commissioner Guerra as well, too.
Any other comments, gentlemen?
I just have a quick question. Could you go to the beginning of your thing when the house overlay zone thing?
Sure.
Because I just noticed one of the block lines there, and I was just kind of curious how, okay, go back one more before that. One more before that. Paramount and Imperial, yeah, right there, okay. So you see where the Apollo Park is, and you see Paramount Boulevard and Imperial, right? Well, you see the darkest colored one on there. So you're saying under this, the housing overlay, so that will be rezoned, that you could put multifamilies on that dark one there?
Correct. So the way it works as an overlay is you'll still have a base zone. So that base zone, if I can read here, has that red. So that's a commercial zone.
Okay.
So that's the base zone. The overlay allows that. So right now, if you look at the zoning, the commercial, there's nothing about housing. It's businesses and,
Right.
and commercial and retail and so forth. That housing overlay now opens it up to allow for housing on that site.
Okay, so right now on that corner, yeah, there's a strip mall, there's a gas station, three gas stations on that corner, Paramount and Imperial. So it looks like with that dark, I mean, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying, so that's what that means, though, that on that strip shopping center could be built multi-units there by this.
Yeah, and all what staff and through the zoning code, what we're doing is allowing that site to accommodate housing. It now will be up to the property owner to then go ahead and decide if he'd like to develop that particular site for housing and submit applications. That's not up to the city. We're just creating that avenue to allow for that housing.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much.
Moving on our agenda, does the Community Development Director have a report on a city council action or any other general update?
I don't at this time.
Okay. Now we can move forward with our public hearing for tonight. Now is the time set aside for public hearing for PLN 24-0060, specific plan amendment and zoning text amendment. Does the Planning Commission Secretary Rhea have proof of publication?
Yes, we do.
Will the Community Development Director introduce the staff making the presentation?
Yes, thank you, Chair Uva. Tonight we have an item that's been a collaborative effort by our consultant team and our city staff team. The presentation will be provided by our planning consultant, Laurel Reimer, and assisting her from the city staff team has been Senior Planner Abraham Luna. Thank you.
I'm sorry. That's my fault.
We'll get there eventually. Here we go. Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Laurel Reimer. I am a planning consultant and will be presenting this item to you tonight. Planning application number 24-00060 is a specific plan amendment and zoning text amendment for the Rancho Los Amigos South Campus specific plan. The request before you is a request to amend the Rancho Los Amigos South Campus specific plan to allow the continuation of industrial uses within existing buildings located within the Flex Tech Biomedical Subdistrict, and to add a definition for existing FTBM building within the Downey Municipal Code, Section 9310. The Rancho Los Amigos South Campus specific plan was adopted on October 12, 2021 to promote future development of the southern portion of the Rancho Los Amigos campus, which has sat mostly vacant since the consolidation of the Rancho Los Amigos National Rehabilitation Center in the 1980s. The Rancho Los Amigos South Campus specific plan is unique in that it's a city-initiated specific plan, but on land that is entirely owned by Los Angeles County. The specific plan envisions a variety of uses that complement the medical facilities in the North Campus, which is the area north of Imperial Highway, while allowing for the expansion of the county's regional facilities. The Rancho Los Amigos South Campus specific plan also lays out how to best develop transit supportive uses around the proposed Metro West Santa Ana Branch Gardendale station, which is located on the southern border of the specific plan. The Rancho Los Amigos South Campus specific plan is comprised of approximately 172 acres, and it's divided into 4 subdistricts. The subject-specific plan amendment will only apply to the Flex Tech Biomedical Subdistrict, which is the area shown in yellow here. The intent of the Flex Tech Biomedical Subdistrict is to promote job-creating uses and to complement the Rancho Los Amigos National Rehabilitation Center to the north with office and medical uses that can provide supportive services to the rehabilitation center. The subdistrict encourages a grouping of light industrial, office, and research uses together to create an innovation hub in the city of Downey. Prior to the adoption of the Rancho Los Amigos South Campus specific plan, land uses within this area were governed by the Rancho Los Amigos specific plan, which was SP 85-1, and the Rancho Los Amigos Business Center specific plan, which is SP 88-1. SP 85-1 and SP 88-1 envisioned light industrial and business park uses for the area, for that Flex Tech Biomedical Subdistrict area. In 1990, Los Angeles County entered into a 99-year ground lease with FDC partner Rancho LP, who is the applicant for this request. FDC partners Rancho LP then constructed 4 business park buildings, which is the square towards the upper right of this picture, and 3 warehouse buildings. And then later in 1999, they constructed a 4th warehouse building. So in this picture here, the buildings outlined in red are owned by the applicant. Since their construction, the buildings owned by the applicant have been operating with various warehouse, distribution, office, and light industrial uses. Some of these uses required a conditional use permit in SP 85-1 and SP 88-1, and the applicant obtained conditional uses for those buildings and for those uses and has maintained those conditional use permits since. The applicant has made significant investments in the Flex Tech Biomedical Subdistrict since entering into that long-term ground lease with Los Angeles County in 1990. That lease doesn't expire until March 27th, 2089. The applicant's business park and warehouse uses support a diverse mix of uses, some of which are not permitted within the Rancho Los Amigos South Campus specific plan. So this means that the adoption of the specific plan in 2021 rendered several of the existing uses as non-conforming. As with all non-conforming uses, they would be subject to the provisions of Downey Municipal Code Section 9410, the non-conforming uses, buildings, and structures section. So per this section, non-conforming uses are not permitted to expand, to increase the size of the tenant space, or to relocate to another tenant space. And as with all non-conforming uses, they are permitted to continue operations, but once they are vacant for 180 days, that use must cease and cannot come back. Listed here are some of the existing uses or are the existing uses within the applicant's buildings. As you can see, most of the buildings house businesses that operate warehouse, office, distribution, or wholesale uses. So per strict adherence to the Rancho Los Amigos South Campus specific plan, many of these uses would not be allowed, and some of these businesses would then not be allowed. They would have to once they vacate, another business of similar use could not come back. So the applicant has several decades left on their lease with Los Angeles County, and therefore they've requested a specific plan amendment and a zoning text amendment to ensure continued operations of the existing businesses and to enable their existing buildings to be leased out to similar uses in the future. Los Angeles County, as the landowner, has authorized the applicant to pursue this request. The requested specific plan amendment will add this paragraph here to section 5.4.2 of the Rancho Los Amigos South Campus specific plan. This is the code, this is the section of the specific plan that pertains to the Flex Tech Biomedical Subdistrict. So specifically, it would state, it is recognized that much of the property within the Flex Tech Biomedical Subdistrict is subject to long-term ground leases with the County of Los Angeles as lessor. Such property has been developed with, among other things, 4 large industrial buildings and a 4-building business park. These lawful uses and structures that were established before the adoption of this specific plan and within the FTBM subdistrict shall be allowed to continue and operate through the end of the ground lease, which terminates on March 27, 2089. Such uses and structures may be maintained and repaired through regular maintenance activities, including all necessary exterior, underground utility, and interior maintenance, repairs, and replacements. Any future remodels and/or tenant improvements shall be reviewed in accordance with the city's routine plan check submittal process. In the event of partial or complete destruction of any pre-existing structures, such structures may be repaired and restored to their previous configuration. So essentially, the request before you tonight is to make it clear to any future reader of this specific plan that there is this long-term lease, and that those existing buildings can maintain their current operations. Additionally, the specific plan amendment will amend Table 5-1, which is the allowable uses table, to add permitted within existing FTBM buildings to the notes column of the permitted uses table, and to specifically apply to parcel delivery terminals, warehouse and wholesale brokers, jobbers, dealers, and distributors. So it's only these types of uses, and it's only within existing FTBM buildings where this applies. There is not a definition for existing FTBM buildings, and the specific plan does not currently have a definition section. So the request also includes a zoning text amendment, which would then define existing FTBM building and put that within Downey Municipal Code Section 9130, which is where the other definitions are. So an existing FTBM building is an existing building in the Rancho Los Amigos South Campus specific plan within the Flex Tech Biomedical Subdistrict that was established prior to the adoption of the RLASCSP and has operated with either a parcel delivery terminal, warehouse, logistics facility, distribution center, dispatch facility, drayage facility, or wholesale brokers, jobbers, dealers, distributors, or other use established prior to the adoption of the RLASCSP.
Could you repeat that again?
Yeah, I know. It is important to note that the changes requested would permit these industrial uses solely in buildings located within the Flex Tech Biomedical Subdistrict and solely within buildings that were existing prior to the adoption of the specific plan. The applicant owns and operates all of the buildings that this specific plan amendment would apply to. Los Angeles County also owns many buildings within this subdistrict. However, those were not are not currently or previously used with these types of uses. So the buildings owned and operated by Los Angeles County are not eligible for this request. It's only the existing buildings owned by the applicant that are, and it just so happens that is the applicant. Let's say they were to sell during the ground lease to someone else, then that person can also continue on. But it's important that it has to be existing buildings with existing uses.
Question. Can you identify or clarify dealers in the statement?
So warehouse brokers, jobbers. I actually don't have a definition for for warehouse dealers.
I can answer Commissioner Saikali. There's a few terms that are used in this definition that's I've discussed with staff. If you want to put it back up, that would be great. I was about to refer to it. And
Do you want this slide or the next one?
The one that it was on.
Okay.
I may be mispronouncing this, so correct me if I'm wrong. Abraham, dryage facility, jobbers, and dealers. Those terms were not very common in this type of land use discussion. When we reviewed the definitions of those terms, they relate to wholesale distributions, which is a company that buys items in bulk in large quantities and then moves them to retail. So it's very similar to a company that buys, takes like a jobber, for example, takes the quantities from the port and then transfers them through transportation to the warehouse. So jobbers, dealers, and drayage facility are very, they're synonyms, if you will, in the terms. So they refer to a wholesaler type of warehousing and distribution centers.
Thank you.
In those, that specific wording is already in the specific plan, so we're not trying to amend the use itself, just allowing that use within these particular buildings.
Can I ask another question? That just made me think about it. So when we saw the original one, this is section 1, the yellow one, if you will. I'm a visual guy with the maps and stuff. I think that includes the warehouse, right? I mean, excuse me, the courthouse, right? Or no, the courthouse is just above it, I guess?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay, so the courthouse has, I mean, and that's, okay, so the applicant here owns everything in yellow that's circled with the red, is that it?
That's correct.
Okay.
The other buildings shown here are owned by LA County, and they have various county uses.
What's the one over here on the right? That's the health department, right next to in between the two red things?
Correct. That's the health department. The one to the north is the courthouse, and then there's some small buildings, I guess, to the top left. Those, they're county buildings, and I think one of them might be the animal shelter. Does that sound?
No, that's way over here on the left. That's
Okay.
way on the left. That's when we get confused. That's on the other side of the broken blue thing there, over there. Yeah, that's outside of the south campus. You have to go all the way to Gardendale or Garfield to get to that. So,
Yeah,
But so then these other ones, is the zoning the same on all 4 of these on there?
Correct. So everything in yellow is essentially, the zoning is governed by the specific plan, and everything in yellow is the same zone.
Okay, but how about like in the ones that are owned by the county? I think most of 3 and 2 are owned by the county. Can they build affordable housing there on their own?
Those areas are governed by other portions of the specific plan, and I know some parts of them, I believe, do allow for housing, but I don't know the specifics of those other zones to know if they specifically mandate affordable housing. I know that it's a mix of uses that, for example, the area in green, that's the transit-oriented development. But unfortunately, I don't know the specifics of all of the uses allowed within those sub-districts to adequately answer your question.
So is it still true for us? So a long time ago, the county was going to build a data center there. They were going to build 3 county headquarters besides the 3 that they have in their land back there until it got political. And then all the other supervisors says, oh, you can't have it all in Kannabe's district and one thing. So it became a political fight. But the one thing at that time, we were working really well with the county, and the county said, you know, it was technically, we can build anything we want there. We don't need you, city. But yes, once we put our first Subway store, you know, franchise there, and then they got to come to the city and get the regular permit. Is that in theory still applicable today?
It is, because the county is the landowner. They did the same thing if it was federally owned land. They trump the city.
Right.
But they, especially with the areas that are operated by non-county entities, such as the applicant, which are these
Right.
areas, then those, it's governed by the specific plan. And they did work collaboratively with the city in developing the specific plan. And so I would hope that they would continue to honor that specific plan that they partnered in, or that they supported the creation of. But in theory, yes, they could just say, we're the county, we trump you.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think what worries a lot of people that live there, one of the reasons I got up was I don't live that far from there, but I'm far enough away that I can vote on this. So I go for bike rides and walks there and all the South Campus. So in your applicant on there takes good care of their buildings and everything else. That's probably the safest part of all that down there in the South Ranches campus. But I think my biggest fear with the residents have, especially just to the right of 2 and 4 there, all that those residents there, is that something is going to be built there without the city going through it. Something like they were trying to force on Norwalk on there and bring in all the new homeless shelters and so forth. So we don't have an answer whether that can just be done there. Can the county just do that?
As was stated, so they can trump the city, but what has been their practice is they ask the city for a conformance letter or a consistency letter with our general plan. So they've been good partners in reaching out with what they want to do, and our council has passed those consistency findings for those projects they proposed in the past.
Okay. Thank you.
May I interrupt with a question? Sorry. On this area 1 with the red outline, are there a lot of vacancies in there, or are they all pretty much rented out?
The applicant is here and they can confirm, but my
Okay.
understanding is that it's fully occupied.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Just to the right of that, it was Financial Partners Credit Union outside of that. And they did look, I think they still might be a tenant in there, or a small portion of it, but they did look for adding on, and it was all occupied when they did that. I remember them telling me about that.
Okay.
So staff did review this request for compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act and determined that this request qualifies for a categorical exemption under state CEQA guidelines section 15301, which is the existing facilities request. And that consists of the operation, repair, maintenance, permitting, leasing, licensing, and minor alteration of existing facilities. So in this case, it's existing buildings that we're discussing. And it also qualifies for an exemption under CEQA guidelines section 15061B3, which is the common sense exemption, where it can be seen with certainty that there's no possibility that the project will have a significant effect on the environment. So in this case, the request is an amendment to the Rancho Los Amigos South Campus specific plan to add existing uses to the permitted uses table. It does not involve construction, and it does not involve an expansion of use. It's just allowing for existing things to remain. So it qualifies for those exemptions. Additionally, this area was previously analyzed under previous environmental impact reports, including the Downey Vision 2025 Comprehensive General Plan Update, the Rancho Los Amigos South Campus Specific Plan, and the Rancho Los Amigos South Campus Specific Plan. And per Public Resources Code Section 21166 and CEQA Guidelines Section 15162, the project consists entirely of land that was previously analyzed in an environmental impact report, and there's no extenuating circumstances which would require a subsequent environmental review. So staff is comfortable in proceeding with a categorical exemption for this project.
Okay.
The project was publicly noticed. Because this is a specific plan amendment, it required tribal notification. Letters were sent out on July 10th of this year for the required 90-day tribal consultation period, which ended on October 8th of 2024. Staff did not receive any requests for consultation from tribal groups. The public notices were also published on November 7th, 2024 in the Downey Patriot and mailed to all tenants and property owners within a 500-foot radius of the site. And staff has not received correspondence from the public regarding this application. So based on the analysis contained within the staff report and presented tonight, staff has concluded that all findings can be made for the requests. Therefore, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 24-4040, which recommends that the City Council adopt an ordinance for this proposed specific plan amendment. And staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 24-4041, which is a recommendation that the City Council adopt an ordinance for the proposed zoning text amendment. This concludes my presentation. I'm available and the applicant is available if you have questions.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're the only one doing the presentation. Abraham is not. That's correct? Okay, good. Thank you. He's smiling. Before I open the public hearing and call the applicant or their representative, this would be the time for planning commissioners to discuss any pre-hearing site visits or pre-hearing discussions that the commissioners may have had about this project. Commissioner Guerra.
No, none about the specific.
Mr. Saikali? And none from me either. Okay, the public hearing is now open. Will the applicant or their representative please come forward to give testimony?
Good evening, Commissioners.
Good evening.
My name is Eric Knurg. Back when I had brown hair, I developed this project for the partnership. We called it a public-private joint venture. We did it in really 3 phases. The project has been, very successful and very beneficial to the city, both in terms of taking county public land and putting it onto the property tax rolls. Over the years, we've had many retail sales tax generating tenants, job creators, and we believe that it's been quite a benefit to the city, both for the reasons just stated, but at the time of development, we were required to make a great deal of infrastructure improvements, including the slip ramps along Imperial and some traffic intersection improvements in the city. And we tore down 21 dilapidated buildings and cleared out the asbestos, et cetera, et cetera. But that's just my attempt at a little introduction as to, how we started and where we are now in terms of the business part. And maybe anticipating some questions there really is no intent, save for any really unforeseen changes in the way business is done and things are distributed and things are made. I really don't see, for the balance of the ground lease term, 60 plus years, I really don't see any need for redevelopment other than, remodeling a building for a new tenant, adding offices, deducting offices, updating energy standards, things like that.
Okay.
Any questions?
I have none. Do any other? None? Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I confirm if there has been any correspondence in favor or in opposition?
No correspondence was received for this project.
Okay. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor or in opposition of the application? Members of the audience wishing to address the Planning Commission during the public hearing may come to the podium when your number is called, but I see the blue numbers and it doesn't look like anybody has taken a number. Is there anyone wishing to come forward and address? No. Okay. Let's see. Any final questions from any of us before I close the public hearing? Okay. The public hearing is now closed. Now is the time for the Planning Commission to deliberate.
Yeah, I used to have brown hair too. When Mayor Meredith Perkins, he ran for office for the development of the South Campus. He talked me into running. So we both served 8 and 8 years, so 16 years, and now it's been 10 years. So the South Rancho campus has been part of our lives forever, if you will. And I do remember the times when all those buildings and tearing down one building. I was in Supervisor Kanabe's office, literally when they found some human remain hands in one of the buildings. And we had to come down. So there's a long history there. The scariest place in America used to be that alley of no return where we used to take our kids and scare them. So there's a big history with that, with Rancho, the South Rancho. But these buildings are well maintained, well taken care of. This is, probably the best part of the whole South Campus. And I mean, I've tried to look on there looking for pitfalls or things that something that could be, and I can't think of something that could be. We're changing the lease to making it be able to, replace the buildings or fix the buildings or do some of those things on there. So, yeah, I have no issues with that, and I'll be voting in the affirmative, so.
Yeah, I have no issues either.
Me neither.
What is the pleasure of the Planning Commission? May I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay. Commissioner Saikali, you want a second?
Second.
Okay. Seconded by Commissioner Saikali. It has been moved and seconded to approve PLN 24-0060, specific plan amendment and zoning text amendment. Planning Commission Secretary Ria, may I have a vote? And it will be electronic.
Motion passes 3-0.
Great. May I remind that the action of the Planning Commission will be final unless the matter has been appealed to the City Council with the appropriate fee within a 15-day period as set forth in Downey City Municipal Code.
Madam Chair, if I could just clarify on that last statement, our apologies for the script. This item will move forward with your recommendation to the City Council, and that would be through a public hearing, which will be noticed in the same manner that this meeting was noticed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that correction. Okay, thank you. Now is the time for non-agenda public comment. Persons wishing to address the Planning Commission on any item listed on the agenda other than public hearing items may do so at this time. Members of the audience wishing to address the Planning Commission on non-agenda items may come to the podium when your number is called, and those would be yellow numbers, and no one has taken a yellow number. Is that correct?
Go ahead, read number 1. Still there.
It's still there, right. So no one wishes to come forward. Okay, great. Consent calendar, I see none. Other new business, I see none. And does the Community Development Director have any additional comments?
I do not at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Great, so we are adjourned at 7:38, and I wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving.
For the record, no hands were found or bones were found in the making of our building. In the making of your buildings, yeah. It was ordered by the water tower. Remember that? They used to do the morgue back there.